District of Columbia's Department of Energy and Environment and DOE's Fisheries and Wildlife Division, I'm pleased to welcome you all here to Washington, D.C. for the International Urban Wildlife Conference. The first thing that often comes to people's minds when they think of Washington, D.C. may be the role it plays in national and international politics. But the district also has one of the highest amounts of green space per capita in the country. Rock Creek Park is more than twice the size of New York City's Central Park and is home to endangered species, including our state amphipod, the Hayspring amphipod, and to northern long-eared bats. At the National Arboretum, the exploits of bald eagles, Mr. President and the First Lady, and more recently, Mr. President and his new mate, Lotus, played out for several years as must-see TV via an Eagle Cam, until this year, when they tired of the paparazzi and moved to a more secluded location. Residents and tourists alike revel in spotting beaver in Anacostia River near Nationals Park and foxes roaming the mall near the Smithsonian Castle. And I know this because they send me their photos. Birders visit Kenilworth Aquatic Gardens, Kingman Island, and other parks to spot our state bird, the wood thrush, and other resident and migrant species. At DOE's Aquatic Resources Education Center in Anacostia Park, we introduce children and members of the public to our fish, turtles, frogs, mussels, and other aquatic residents. And our wildlife biologists lead bat and bird walks, train community members and park staff as invasive plant weed warriors, and educate the public about native pollinators. The district is the only completely urban jurisdiction that manages its wildlife as a state. To do so, we collaborate and cooperate with our federal colleagues, particularly in the National Park Service and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, with our sister agencies and district government, with adjoining jurisdictions and private landowners. We would not be able to do this work without our partnerships with urban wildlife and plant ecologists at places like the University of District of Columbia and the University of Maryland, with community science programs that are led by organizations like the Anacostia Watershed Society and Capital Nature, with environmental educators at places like Living Classrooms and Anacostia Riverkeeper, and with wildlife rehabilitators at City Wildlife, and with community organizations like Rock Creek Conservancy and Friends of Anacostia Park. These partnerships are what enable us to better understand and manage wildlife in the district, to engage and uplift diverse voices in planning for our future, and to communicate to the public, media, and policymakers about wildlife in the district. I hope that you will have some time to visit some of the places I've mentioned and to look for wildlife while you're here. And I think some of you already did that, judging by the conference program for yesterday. But regardless of whether you have already gotten out or you're going to get out sometime during this conference to see our wildlife, I hope that you have a wonderful time over the next few days. Thank you.
All right, I managed to lose a whole page of notes, so I'm going to wing this part. All right, so this is our 7th International Urban Wildlife Conference. I think I have that number right, starting back in 2009 in Amherst, Massachusetts. And it's our first one back since the COVID pandemic first started. So welcome back, and welcome to all of you first-timers for this conference. For those that are new here, this conference is hosted by the Urban Wildlife Working Group, which is a group of the larger Wildlife Society. We have this conference every other year on odd years. This was supposed to be the 2021 conference because of the COVID-19 pandemic. We shifted to online, and so it's actually been 4 years since we've all been back in person. And to be honest, this is my most favorite conference that I go to. You are all my people, and so I'm super honored to be able to help organize this conference with the conference planners. And we're super excited that we get to show off our amazing city and all that has to offer in regards to nature, culture, and the people that live here. So I want to first thank our sponsors, Texas Parks and Wildlife, Wildlife Acoustics, Maryland, Delaware Wildlife Society chapter, the Virginia Wildlife Society chapter, Boston Borough Institute, and DC Exhibits. I'd also like to personally thank Melody Mobley, Christine DellAmore, and Beth Pratt for their keynote addresses that they will be having. And I also want to give a recognition to the planning group. So will you all please stand up? So Maureen Murray, Sarah Oquan, Leslie Ketchum, and Richard is here, Jessica. This is where I'm winging it now because I lost this page. Mark Patterson, Laura Young. You guys can stay standing because we need to give you guys a round of applause. So they've spent over 1.5 years planning this conference, and this one wasn't easy, and it is volunteer time. So please give them a round of applause. And I'm sorry if I missed anybody else that was on our Zoom calls for last year. I will buy you a beer at one of the social. I lost the most important page of my notes. Okay, so we've developed a program, as I mentioned, that is jam-packed full of science and an application of urban wildlife, but we've also tried to set up a conference where there's time for reconnecting, since a lot of us have been apart for a while. So we have a social tonight, we have some activities tomorrow, but the night off, and we've sort of developed also long lunches into that program. And that was intentional so you guys could find time to connect with your people, and spend some time reconnecting with them and not always going to conference stuff. So tonight we have a conference at the Solis Outpost in Navy Yards. Pretty easy to get there by metro or to jump in a lift, or you could even probably walk or take one of the Capitol bike shares to get over there. Tomorrow night we have a poster session and we'll have a cash bar at the postal session, and the Urban Explorers group will have a networking event tomorrow night. But tomorrow night is a night off, and that was intentional for you all to meet up with your people and have a night in DC and enjoy sort of DC life, at least what a Tuesday night can offer you in DC. I know some groups are already doing some socials and happy hours, so you guys enjoy that time. And then Wednesday, we will wrap up the conference with a dinner at the Hamilton. Yeah, so is everybody ready to get started on this conference? All right. You've got to listen to me for a couple more minutes because I have a few minor announcements. All right, so after this session in the Eaton, the rest of the conference will be at the Hamilton Hotel. So we will not come back to this building for the rest of the conference. So after lunch, meet us at the Hamilton, and we'll be at the Hamilton Hotel for the rest of the conference. I already mentioned tonight's social is at the Solis Outpost in Navy Yard. If you look up Solis Outpost and it's sending you to Virginia or really far away in Virginia, don't go to those. Go to the Solis Outpost that is in DC in Navy Yards. We also have a storyboard at registration. The theme of this conference is tell your stories. We want to hear your story. We want to see what kind of people, who you are at this conference. So if you haven't engaged with that board and drawn yourself and put who you are in your bubbles and done all that, please head over there to registration and do that storyboard. We picture some sort of very diverse artwork and people drawn up on that board. So please go engage with our storyboard. And then finally, it's Pride. And DC really knows how to do Pride. So there's a lot of events going on this week. The big parade is at the end of the week, so most of you might be gone, but if you stick around, there's a huge parade downtown. But there's a lot of events going on. So when you have some free time, try to check out some of the Pride events going on. All right, so now I'm excited to hand over the mic to Maureen Murray, the chair of the Urban Wildlife Group, and Sarah Okwan, the chair-elect, for our official wording group greeting and getting us started on our plenary session. So thank you all.
Hey everybody, my name's Maureen. I'm the chair of the Urban Wildlife Working Group. And I just want to echo what Travis said, that we are thrilled to have another in-person meeting. I'm so excited to see you all, to put this meeting together, literally years and years. So we're excited to kick it off. I would like to know, can you raise your hand if this is your first time at an International Urban Wildlife Conference? Awesome. Okay, and flip side, thanks. I'm sure than Travis. And who's been to like 5 International Urban Wildlife Conferences? Yeah, nice. Okay, awesome. Okay, sweet. Okay, so I'm going to be obnoxious and repeat what Travis did because I want to thank the local host planning committee. So Travis Gallo, please stand up. Jennifer Mullinax, please stand up. Shannon Brown, please stand up. She's working right now. God bless Shannon. Okay, if you went on a field trip yesterday and it was awesome, it was because of Shannon. Awesome. Okay, I also want to thank the board of the Urban Wildlife Working Group because they have been working tirelessly. And as Travis mentioned, this is all volunteer. So please stand up again. Sarah Okwan, Leslie Ketchum, Richard Haugen. What do we got? Kaylee Byers. Where's Kaylee? Morgan Farmer, our student rep. Jason Lucier, please stand up. Anya Patterson, Mark Patterson, our sponsorships coordinator. Laura Young. And last but not least, Jessica Alderson, who's not even on the group, and she's done so much work. Okay, awesome. Okay, so to give a little context, in case you don't know what the working group does, we put on this conference every 2 years. But on the off years, we also do activities with the Wildlife Society Conference. That's our parent organization. So we put together urban-related field trips and symposia. And we've also started to do more virtual events, having our members give talks to sort of connect with one another and learn about what different members are doing. If you want to stay in touch with us, please shoot us an email. I've emailed you approximately 35 times, so you probably have our email. And if you want to stay in touch more, you can join our work group. You're more than welcome. We have a table back at the Hamilton with some literature about the Wildlife Society and about the working group, so please join if you'd like. And if you just want to learn more about what we do, we are going to have a working group meeting on Tuesday at 3:15. And you don't have to be a member to come to the meeting. You can just come to learn about what we're doing and see if you want to be. Okay, and if you have any questions, if anything comes up during the conference, come see any of the people I just mentioned or shoot us an email and we'd be happy to. As Travis mentioned, happy Pride. We're so excited to be in DC specifically now. And now I have the great honor of launching our plenary presentation. And so we've invited 3 excellent speakers today to fit our conference theme of telling your story, how to communicate our science with the media, policymakers, and the public while uplifting diverse voices. And so we specifically chose all 3 speakers because they are experts in this. They know how to speak to different groups and how to get science out there in an engaging and effective way. And so our first speaker, I'm very excited to introduce Christine Dell'Amore. She's the managing editor at National Geographic, and she leads the storytelling strategy for the website and magazine. She focuses primarily on wildlife and particularly underappreciated species like urban wildlife, which I think we can all get on board with. I think they're actually quite appreciated in this room, but and she put out a long form piece about urban wildlife a couple of years ago. You probably interviewed a few people in this room actually for that piece. So we're really excited to hear about her experience. I'm going to get this tech going, and Christine, would you mind joining me on stage? How can we share our screen on Zoom? Awesome. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. As Maureen said, I've probably interviewed many of you and not met you in person, so I'm very excited about that. And I'm just excited to be here to talk about my favorite subject in journalism, which is urban wildlife. And I know I'm in the right place for doing that. So in the theme of telling my story, I thought I'd take us back to the 80s, where you can see I wrote my first story about, I don't know if you can read this, the dog. Oh, okay. The dog who loved pancakes was my very first story when I was 6. And I'm still rocking my horses, as you can see, back then and now. But I was a child that was always interested in writing and animals. I was an only child, and although I had a lot of friends, I still gravitated very much to my pets and to wildlife and to learning about endangered species from a very, very young age. And as I grew up, I became extra fascinated with this concept of resilient animals, which I'm sure many of you are as well. Why are some species just so successful and others aren't? And that really got me into urban coyotes. And as many of you know how successful they are, they outwit us on a daily basis. They're spreading through the country despite us trying to prevent them from doing so. And when I went to the University of Maryland for my undergraduate degree, which is where Travis went. I was the first graduate of the environmental science program in 1998. They had just launched it a few years before. I did my thesis on urban coyotes. And I don't have a copy anymore. I looked. So I'm very bummed about that, but it was a very burgeoning topic at the time. And I knew that this was a topic that I was fascinated by, that I really wanted to continue doing in my journalism career. So I went to grad school at University of Colorado in Boulder, and I completed a science journalism program, which was a fantastic foundation for the job I have now working at National Geographic, because I learned the basics of science. I learned about ecology. I learned a lot of other topics I hadn't learned in undergrad, and I learned how to tell those stories in a journalistic way. And after that 2-year program in Boulder, I moved back and got my dream internship at Smithsonian Magazine here in DC. It was a 6-month internship. I think they paid me like $18,000, something, not that much to live in DC. But I was just very thrilled to be at Smithsonian Magazine, and I brought my interests with me. And I think this might have been one of the first national stories written about urban coyotes. This was published in March 2006, I believe, yes. And I love the headline, I still love it, City Slinkers. And for that story, I actually got to go to Rock Creek Park with, I'm not sure if he's still there, Ken Farabee. And we got to see coyote footprints, some of the first coyotes that had arrived in DC, which was very exciting. And there was something about this story that stuck with me, and that was one of the quotes that Stan Gert had given me. He said something like, something happened, something we don't really understand. And he was referring to a 3,000% increase in coyotes in the Chicagoland area between something like 1990 and 2000. And as a journalist, you always get questions in your brain that just get lodged there and they stay there. And you're like, there's something that I need to investigate. That is something worthy. So that quote stayed with me as I moved on to my dream job, which was National Geographic. So I started in National Geographic 16 years ago. I started as a digital editor, so I was covering pretty much everything under the sun, from paleontology to climate change. I was just in for all of it. So one of the amazing opportunities that I've had at National Geographic is that I've gotten to travel to all 7 continents reporting for them, which has been really, really incredible. And this picture was taken at the South Pole, which was very cold. That was in 2011, and that was part of a National Science Foundation fellowship that is provided for journalists. And that actually led to my first book, South Pole. So National Geographic obviously offered me extreme, amazing opportunities to tell my story, but I still had the urban wildlife idea in the back of my mind. So I launched this series that's still active. You can still check it out if you Google wild cities in National Geographic. And I discovered that our readers really liked urban wildlife. So I was editing stories about raccoons, about caracals in Cape Town, about otters in Singapore, boars in Europe. I discovered all of these international stories that needed to be told about urban wildlife. And the really cool thing was, we know when a reader likes a story, we can tell the engagement numbers, we can tell how many times they click on something. And they really, really, really were interested in these topics. So I said, okay, maybe I can pitch a story for National Geographic magazine, the flagship magazine, which, as you can imagine, is extremely difficult to get an assignment in, even if you have worked there for 15 years. But in 2016, I pitched a story to the executive board at Nat Geo about urban wildlife. And let's just say it did not go well. I had to really channel my inner coyote, my inner resilience, because I had one person on the left telling me, this is not a National Geographic story. And then I had another person on the right saying, I have squirrels in my backyard, who cares? And so I spent the next several years really convincing these executives that I wanted to tell a broader story, the story that you all research every day, which is how our animals, our urban animals, are adapting to city life, and how in the absence of their native habitat, they are figuring out how to live with us and how they may be changing. It could be their boldness is changing, it could be problem solving. And so once I seemed to get that through to these executives, then the idea started picking up steam. So I think I did hopefully do my inner coyote justice and got the story off the ground. And in July of last year, my feature ran in National Geographic under this title, Why Cities Are Going Wild. One of the amazing things about this story, and one of the reasons why it was successful, is because of the photography. Corey Arnold is a Washington state-based photographer who specializes in doing these sort of nighttime images. And you'll see this is a really arresting photo of a coyote crossing a railroad bridge at night. And many of you are familiar with camera traps, I'm sure. And he spent a lot of time putting out camera traps, re-putting out camera traps, fixing camera traps, months on end. And he just did such an impressive job with this photography. And I think it's a really unique contribution to sort of the urban wildlife imagery world, as it were. This image was one of the most popular ones that was shared very often in social media. And a funny anecdote is when we were finishing up this story, someone said, I'm really worried. I think this is a grizzly bear. I think we're going to have to do a correction. And I said, no, this is a black bear. Don't worry, it's just a huge black bear. So for the story, I did face some challenges again. So I had to, again, channel my inner coyote. One of the first challenges was I was reporting right in the smack of the pandemic. So many of you were not researching what you do. And so I had to do a lot of Zoom calls. I had to cancel a lot of reporting trips. The good thing was Corey lived on the West Coast, so he was still able to get out and do a lot of the photography. So he did a lot of photography, in Lake Tahoe with these urban bears, which I think in the caption says they're 25% heavier than their rural counterparts. And he got some amazing images. And he was also able to photograph in San Francisco. So I was very bummed I wasn't able to go, but he got some great images from this particular no-kill humane group you may have heard of, or company. It's called Mr. Raccoon. And it rescues raccoons from, hidey holes and places in people's houses, and then seals up the entrance so they don't come back. And I encourage you to look at the story online because there's many more cute photos of raccoons and such. However, I did get to do some reporting. I went to Asheville twice, was charged by a black bear on a back porch. I went to Chicago twice, and I spent some time with Travis and other urban wildlife researchers here in DC, and got to see coyotes in Rock Creek Park. So maybe you will too. So I felt like I was able to do, a solid job getting my reporting done, despite the pandemic. However, I did suffer another setback, which was I was diagnosed with cancer last year. And that was right when we were starting to fact check this article. And if any of you have been exposed to magazine fact checkers, it's an intense experience. So they might say, are you sure this is actually a street? Because it looks like a highway. And then they'll spend 5 days, researching that fact. So that was extremely difficult. And again, I had to channel that resilience that I so admire in urban wildlife, which is, you notice, one of the themes of my talk. And I was able to complete it with my treatments. And the article did amazingly well. So I'll give you a few examples. for our Instagram app for National Geographic, a good post would probably get about 200,000 likes. That would be considered a success. This post got, the post about this story got 1 million likes on Instagram. So and the other really cool thing to me is that, so National Geographic has, they have international editions around the world. So they have magazines in Estonia and Japan, etc. All of those editions chose to use this cover as their cover story that month, which to me really spoke to the international appeal of this topic. And they even used North American animals for their stories, which just blew me away. So I was just very happy that the subject resonated. And I think what it really showed is that people were looking for more context beyond, I'm sure, what you've seen, those awful one-off stories that an animal bit a person. There's no context. There's just like, we killed the animal, that's it. People are eager to learn more about what is going on with the animals in their backyard. They don't want to just know like the quick basic fact. So my experience culminated in August. This was the day after I finished chemotherapy, actually. And I'm being interviewed by Good Morning America about my story. And that was really, really amazing experience. And I really got to drive home the fact that this message that I thought would resonate with a very wide audience, which is to coexist with wildlife, we have to learn more about them. So that was the main theme of that experience. I wanted to pivot just briefly, and I know I'm going to talk about this more Wednesday at 3:30. I'm going to be participating in a pitch pit panel. But since, you know, some of you might not be able to make that, I just wanted to go really quickly through a few telling your story tips. And they're pretty basic, so there's no secret sauce to talking to us. Reach out and set up a meeting with us. Christine Wilkinson did that a few weeks ago. Just say, hey, have coffee. You know, let me tell you about your research. And then one thing that often bothers me when I just hear about communication with scientists and journalists is that old saw that scientists can't talk about their research, which really bothers me because you talk to kids, you talk to city council people, you talk to neighbors, you talk to all kinds of people every day in your research. You are the best person to talk about your research. You know your science best. So don't let anyone tell you you need a middleman to communicate. That's my main message. And then also to be active on social media. So I can't tell you how many times I've gotten pitches from freelancers saying, oh my gosh, some scientist posted this amazing paper online. It's in, you know, this obscure journal, we need to cover it. So I recommend doing that. Also thinking a little bit about why your research matters. Of course, all research matters, but what are the implications? What is your research actually intended to do? And what is the context? Those are important questions for journalists. And again, I can talk about that more on Wednesday. And then offer visuals. If you don't have a good camera, I recommend getting one and learning some basics because for Nat Geo, we need great visuals to accompany our stories. And we're doing more vertical video too. So in terms of making your research more interesting to many media outlets, shooting some vertical video while you're in the field is very advisable, unless you're in Montana, fortunately, with the TikTok ban. We're doing a lot on TikTok. So I just thought I would end my talk with a little show and tell. So this is a painting by a Toronto artist named Kate Szabo. And she reached out to me and said she had read about my work and she was really inspired by what I had written about urban wildlife. And she said, I want to do a painting. And I said, okay, great, I'll pay you. The journalist, they can't accept gifts, but so I bought this painting from her and I keep it on my dresser and every morning when I wake up, I look at it and I smile because it reminds me that even though my work and my focus and my passion is on wildlife, really at the end of the day, the purpose is connecting with people and giving them a chance to share the wonder that I have for the natural world.
Thank you so much, Christine, for that inspiring talk. We're gonna have Q&A at the end with all of our plenary speakers as part of a panel. So please hold your questions, but remember what they are. And I'm really glad you brought up resilience, Christine, because we're gonna keep that theme going with our second plenary speaker, Melody Mobley. She's on Zoom, so we're gonna get her connected here. But she was the first Black female American to graduate with a degree in forest management. She rose through the ranks of the Forest Service as the history's first Black female forester and suffered years of abuse, oppression, and tokenism that catapulted her to a lifetime of moral courage. And so we're very excited to hear about her story today. And Melody, I'll let you get started, but I know we also want to play your documentary, so we'll get that started too.
Yes, before we show the documentary, can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Great, great. Thank you so much for allowing me to be part of the conference via Zoom. I was in the hospital admitted 4 times in the last month for congestive heart failure and kidney failure and a bunch of other nonsense. So that's why I'm not with you in person, and please forgive me. I really want to be there, but my doctor won't let me leave the house, essentially. So this first part of my presentation is the trailer, or the sizzle it's called, from the feature-length film that's being made about my life. So let's just run the film. It's only 5 minutes long.
We're getting it going. Can we share the screen too on Zoom?
I think it already is, but.
I never set out to be the first Black female anything. But once I knew I was, I had a point to make. My mama named me right, named me Staria. I've always been very strong. I grew up in nature, went outside of Louisville, Kentucky. We were so poor. My mama, she had to find ways to entertain us. So many times we would just jump in our 63 Falcon and we would get on the road and just run it. She helped instill my love of nature. Mama loved me and I knew she loved me, but she was so sad. If I had known I was going to lose her so early, I was 15 when I lost her, I would have asked so many more questions. I knew in order to make mom proud, I had to make something of my life. I had my first summer. That diversity of experience and learning all the practical things thrilled me. And so I decided I love the first service. I didn't want to be a forester, but I didn't choose to be a pioneer. When I was told I was the first Black female forester, I was shocked. After that first summer of orientation, those dreams were knocked out of me, and I carried so many insecurities until I got wings. And then I knew I went straight to spot anything. I still have a night, and we don't know if my back will ever be that. I never was seen as a smart professional first. I was a young Black woman. And that's what so many of them could never get past.
That would be a control, but sheer control. And she did it well. But then she got to a point where she said, nothing, or the rest. And she was controlled out of control.
I thought we could lose our jobs, but which is worse, putting up with this or losing my job?
I stood up and spoke out against these things that I saw as wrong in order to affect change for other people. I was the first employee to write to the secretary there and say people of color and women in forced service are being tortured. And let me use myself as an example. I was retired in 2005. I never wanted to leave the agency that young in my career. A beautiful river, isn't it? Rivers are so strong. You can't stop it. That's how I want to be, unstoppable forever. I'm going to continue to do everything within my power to reach you. Not only to set in their minds the love of nature, the love of science, but to know that if she survives, she looks like me, I can survive.
Who has done so much for the state, is incredibly inspiring. You give them that opportunity that they can see themselves in a STEM career.
You don't have to look like a white man to be a scientist. You can have space in your teeth, 6 holes in your ears, and purple or free polish under your teeth. All about just from the beginning.
All righty then. Thank you so much for showing that film. Could you all hear the music in the film? Because I couldn't. Can you hear me now?
We can. Let me get it all back set up to where
Could
we
you
were.
all hear the music, Travis?
Yes, we heard it great. The audio,
Okay, great.
the audio is great in here.
Wonderful.
So if you want to try to share your screen, and I'll see how it looks
Mhm.
in the room.
It says that you've disabled participant screen sharing.
Of course I have. All right, now you should.
Okay. Well, you have to stop sharing, it says.
You would think
Okay.
I've done this for 3 years teaching, but I would know what to do. Yes.
Let me see. Okay, can you see my screen right now?
Yep.
Good.
You can see your email though. There you go. Now we can see your presentation.
Great. Okay, I'm going to try not to touch the wrong thing. So,
All right,
I've
well,
been
I'll
a
be
full-
just off camera, so I'll be here to help if you need it.
okay, thank you. So, I've been a forester for about 46 years. I worked in Washington State, where I got my degree, and then I worked in Northern and Southern California, Florida, Tanzania, and Chile a little bit. So I got to go around the world a little and all over the United States a lot. I was a tree hugger from the time I was born. I have to tell you, this is when I was about 3 years old, 2 or 3 years old, in Washington State, just outside of Tacoma, Washington. And I loved trees and nature and wildlife my whole life. Mama didn't have a lot of money to take us out to do things, so she would take us out in nature. I loved animals from birth. They were always my first reference. I studied wildlife when I was in college in Seattle, but the Forest Service offered me a permanent job, and they said I had to get my degree in forest management. By that time, my mom had died, She died when I was 15. And then grandmother had died almost. She was living with, but she had stage 4 breast cancer. So she wasn't long with us. So I switched my major to forest management. And that is something I have regretted my entire life. I do share my life with some little critters. You saw them around in the film, around the point where we were looking at the cicadas. Those are my fur babies. So as I said, I was the first Black female forester in the USDA Forest Service, and probably in the United States. We don't have really good records, but the Smithsonian Institution is saving this uniform and others that I've shared with them in their collections. So that makes me feel really honored. They also have my name on the Wall of Honor in the National Museum of the American Indian. Today, I spend my free time reading to kids in schools and really trying to make sure that they are aware that people who look like me can be scientists. People who look like me are free to go out in parks and will be safe in urban settings. Anytime I hear of someone having a bad experience in an urban park, I am certain to take it up with the police or with Paul Gilbert, who is the head of all national parks, not national, excuse me, state parks in Northern Virginia. This is just a picture of two little girls with fat me in the background. And the little girls are just out on one of my adventures having a good time. This is a picture of me with one of my favorite animals, a corn snake. People say, oh, Black people don't like snakes. And most people, they say, don't like snakes. So I'm trying to turn that around. But for certain people say, oh, Black people don't hike, and brown people don't go out on trails and things like that. That's a myth. That's not true. But the way we can encourage more people of color to go out on trails, go out in our parks and other wild places, is to make everyone feel welcome in these wild or pseudo wild places. We've got to do a better job at that. This is just me showing this beautiful corn snake to a little girl from Boys and Girls Club, trying to get her brave enough to touch it. And you can see at the bottom, she is touching the snake. The first time she's touched urban wildlife in her life. I was really proud of her for that. This is a group of kids that I took out to Upton Park, which is a park in Northern Virginia. And I just showed them little things like how to measure the diameter of a tree or how to key out a tree and figure out what kind it is, how to find tracks from deer in urban settings, how to find remnants of wildlife, a bone or some hair or whatever it might be. And they get so excited coming out. This, if you look at the two people, I don't know if I can point to this or not. Let me see. Yes. Can you see my pointer?
Yes.
This is the park superintendent at Upton Park. This is Paul Gilbert, who I was mentioning, who runs the Northern Virginia state and county parks. He is a really cool man and was so excited about Evan, the park superintendent, bringing these kids and kids of color out, that they put that in their management plan as something they want to accomplish every year. This is just me getting an award from some really cool people for the work that I do getting kids out in nature. One of the other things I do is serve on 3 million boards of directors. And it's really cool to do it. I say 3 million I'm kidding, but I do serve on a lot of boards. You may see me back here. That's me. This is a group called Eco Action Arlington. And the mission of this group is to preserve nature and all that's within it, including urban wildlife. And they're a nonprofit. I love working with nonprofits because they're made up of free thinkers, and that means a lot to me. So I just want to close now and give you my contact information and my website address. And at the end of the next presentation is when I believe we'll take questions. Thank you kindly again for letting me be here. And I'm sorry I can't participate in the entire conference. But if you have questions for me that don't get answered, this is my cell phone number. You can reach me directly, or you can send me an email. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Melody.
You're welcome. I'm trying to stop staring if I can find my pointer.
It's a real honor to have you speaking, Melody. I'm really glad you spoke on Zoom. Really appreciate your time. I know like it's a lot of effort to do this. And I want you to know that you said several things, but everyone was clapping too much. So I'm sure people have plenary.
While we get set up for the Q&A, everyone that's standing in the back, there are some seats over here if you want to move through and take a seat.
Okay, so we're going to move into a Q&A panel. Do we have a mic for the audience?
Yes, this will go here. We
Yeah.
can pop off, and then I'll get the mic and I'll hand it out. So I'll be the one trying to pass it.
Okay, Travis is going to pass the mic around. So everybody think of a question for our panelists. Let's see here. Let's get Melody back on screen. Hey, we still have you. Excellent. Hey. Okay.
Hi.
So while you're all thinking of your questions, I'll kick us off. We've mentioned it a few times. All three talks, I really felt that theme of resilience going through all of these three stories. And I was curious, I know this is a very personal thing, so obviously you just share what you're comfortable with, but I want to know your perspectives on like how to foster resilience for anyone in the crowd who might be needing that strength, but having trouble. Where does that resilience come from for you, and how do you foster it? And maybe since I'm in front of the computer, Melody, why don't you start us off if you don't mind?
Sure, I'm happy to talk about that. Just before I do, I forgot to say something that's very important to me, and I apologize. I wanted to say thank you all so much for doing excellent land acknowledgements. That's so important that we all do those always, because in my small group of influence, it's like, oh, here's Melody trotting out the land acknowledgement again. Because I'm a Black woman, that's supposed to be important to me. Because I'm a quarter Cherokee, that's supposed to be important to me. No, it should be important to all of us. So thank you again. So talking about resilience, the way I found mine, especially after I was raped, was to really focus on my strengths and know that I could get through anything, no matter how horrible, no matter how insurmountable it seemed. I knew within my heart, within my soul, within my essence, that I could get past it, that I had to get past it. One reason I had to was because grandmother was then dying of cancer, and I knew I had to support her emotionally and financially. Another way to build resilience is, and this doesn't seem obvious, but it really worked for me, having a good mentor or two. They can really provide the kind of strength that we all need in order to be resilient. We just have to choose our mentors carefully. So I'll stop just with that much. And after the other speakers speak, if there's more time, I can add more to it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Connie. Here, I'll pass the mic down.
Thanks. Melanie, thanks for sharing. I also, at a very young age, was great. And I think that, not that I wish it on anybody with resilience, but I think when you have to go through experiences like that, it does give you some tools that maybe were not earned in the best way, but that help through challenging times. But I do think, for me, it's, as somebody who loves wildlife, I just turn to the wild world. You know, resiliency, for some reason, I see it tagged as a negative one these days, and I think that is interesting, is the word I use, and I'm not sure what else to say, because we are part of the natural world. We forget that legislative wage challenges or difficult times, that's just part of life. And I will be sitting at 12,000 feet, finishing up a book on Yosemite wildlife. I'm very excited about it this year. And a lot of the alpine creatures inspire me. They move at 12,000 feet and don't hibernate. They store food that they've gathered and make it. Butterflies are animal I love, and you watch these butterflies over 12,000 feet passes with tattered wings, and you think about what they go through, and like this year in the Sierra, well, many of them survive such a snow. So I think I look at the wild world as humans, we think we can have this, and we can't. And I think that's a good realization to have, and to look at how nature handles this every day without blinking. Makes me know that I have it too, because I'm part of nature like they are.
I was going to say the same thing. Oh, sorry. Yeah, for me, I draw resilience from the natural world. I am always putting myself into context of other species, thinking about my role in the world, and continually inspired, which is why I've been working at Nat Geo for 16 years. And the reason that I focus on wildlife is because it's endlessly inspiring to me. Everything from endangered species bouncing back to urban wildlife adapting to cities. It's always touched me personally. I'm always able to relate to that. And then the second thing is when I was telling you about the resistance to my article, the reason that I pushed through is because I believed in the story and I didn't doubt it. I didn't feel like anyone could tell me that it was not a valid story because I believed in it. And I know that's kind of a trite expression, but I think that's ultimately that foundation that got me, you know, to where I ended up.
Let me add one more thing too. I'll tell you, my favorite movie about leadership and resilience is Moneyball, not just because Brad Pitt's in it. Watch it. It is, I mean, he had a vision. He was being threatened with being fired. I was too. I mean, you know, you have to have that vision of resiliency and not let people betray you.
Brad Pitt, is that like the human of P22?
Yes.
That is.
So before we take questions from the audience, I actually have a question, and then just think of your questions and I'll come around with the microphone. Or do you have a microphone out there?
Yeah, Travis.
Okay, great. So to follow up on that, for the three of you, I think one of the, as a parent, I was told that one of the ways you build resiliency in your children is by telling stories about your family that are not always based on the good times, right? Tell stories about your grandparents and yourself and how you overcame it. And so just hearing your three stories today, I think what's so significant to me is how you placed yourself. And I know we kind of asked you to do this, but how you placed yourself in the center of the story. And I wonder if you can just talk a little bit about what you think the power of that is to put yourself in the middle of a story about science or about urban wildlife, or about a career. Why is that so powerful, and how can that inspire others? Would you like to start?
Melody?
Melody?
I couldn't hear all of the question. Could you summarize it and repeat it?
Sure. I think it's significant that in this plenary session, we're hearing not only about the work that you have all done, but about your own personal stories. You're placing yourself in the middle of the story you're telling about your career or about your research. And I'm asking, what do you think the power of that is? Why is that an important part of communicating science, and how can it inspire others?
Thank you very much. I think it's critically important. I think it's important to talk about the good as well as the challenging things that happen to us, which is why I'm so open about being sexually assaulted. It's still happening to people today, and it's got to stop. And it won't unless we talk about it. I think it's so critically important to get our children involved in our stories as appropriate. Taking time just to read a book to them or becoming a mentor for them is even more important. Really being there for them. I don't have human children of my own, but I do have hundreds of adopted kids, just adopted through love, not adopted by law. And really being there for these kids and telling our life story, sharing with them things that have happened to us that we either do want to happen to them or we hope never happens to them. So all of these things are really important.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's critically important too, that LA Times story I showed you, when the reporter first approached me about doing it, I said, no, I'm not the story. But how he convinced me was like, but, young girls are gonna read this story and know that they did, and that really hit home with me. I do think, again, we get back to all the stories being told, no, at the age something, so I think that's important. To show examples and show when it is tough. I mean, that is like, I think especially in this age, if you put, people think achievements and fame, by putting a video up, which you can achieve fame, but experience, these ambitious goals take a lot of work. That was 11, 12 years of my life, no vacations, missed a lot, but it was worth it. I think that to show people what it takes to good and the bad, or at least the challenging and fun. And I'd say the last reason it's really important to be a spokesperson is you need that. People don't give to causes, they give to people. If you want to get a project like a wildlife crossing done, you can't do it with sort of anonymous paper or science. People need to know that somebody's out there cheerleading for it and genuinely being passionate. I think you need a public story that invites almost an intimacy around it, so that people can feel a part of it.
So I like to consider myself an advocate for not only for wildlife journalism, but for science journalism as a whole and the incredible role it plays in society. One thing that always irked me when the museum, which is a museum I used to have in DC that was focused on journalism, it was open for many years, it's now closed, but it was all about political journalism and war or science. All of that stuff is really important. People need to know, but I feel like the role of science journalism and the need for society to understand science has always been overlooked and underappreciated. And so that has been one of my roles as a spokesperson, is to emphasize how important it is to share with the public solid science information and not just these one-off stories that have no context, but rich stories that actually tell what science is, how it's connected to the public.
Okay, do we have some questions from the audience? Travis will come around with a microphone.
Hello, I have a question. How would you recommend to handle like the stress that comes along with dealing with such large projects like the B-22? I know you said that you didn't have a lot of your own time to yourself, and you missed a lot of personal things. So how did you handle that trade-off?
Oh, sorry, Beth, just before, I'm just gonna repeat. Melody, could you hear that question? Okay, the question was, how do you handle these trade-offs when you have this huge project and you have to make sacrifices in your life? And Beth is gonna kick us.
Yeah, no, thanks for asking that. I mean, I think you have to recognize to take on big things like that, there are going to be sacrifices. There's just no way around it. I mean, Seth was there the whole time. It was a long journey. So I think just being upfront about that, recognizing that is part of the project. That is part of what it takes to do big things. And I'm glad you think of people who develop the vaccine in record time, or you know, the James Webb telescope up, right? They, you know, I'm self-care and not moving around. But I will say what kept me going, and it wasn't that there weren't times where I didn't want to collapse or didn't want to just stop. Certainly there were dark nights. The soul was, what choice do we have? If we didn't build this wildlife crossing, those mountain lions would probably have gone extinct. Seth will never let me say will. That's the qualifier, but would probably have gone extinct. So I think, you know, I just couldn't let that happen on my watch. And it, to me, that's just what fueled me, even though you know, I'm just still sitting. I wish I had a better answer. I think it was just, you know, we tend to want to work around challenges or soften stuff. I think there's just no way to take on something that ambitious and not have it impact you. Having said that, I ate lots of chocolate. Would stream some Brad Pitt movies when I needed something, and lots of foot massages when I had 5 minutes in LA.
Melody, do you have anything to add to Beth's answer?
I do, because my whole professional life has been full of trade-offs. From the time I was in college and I wanted to be a wildlife zoologist, and to try to further my studies only in zoology through a PhD. And I did neither. I didn't get a PhD and I didn't study wildlife or wildlife biology. So I have to live with that. And nearly every day I'm regretting not having become a zoologist. But what I did do was take a job with the Forest Service, which allowed me to financially support my family. I rose to the top ranks of the Forest Service, which allowed me to have influence on programs nationally as well as a little bit internationally too. And just the things that I went through. I got beat up twice at 4th and Independence, 14th and Independence, when I was downtown. Excuse me, I don't know why I'm tripping on my words while I'm talking to you. I think it's because I can't see your beautiful faces. But I was making trade-offs like that just the whole time. And it's not easy. The thing that helped me to make those trade-offs was having a goal, both a near term, like 5-year goal, and a 10 to 15-year goal, and being able to clearly see what I wanted to achieve or accomplish. So that's how I did it.
Let's
Hi,
show love,
Maureen.
some love.
How nice to see your beautiful. Look at those beautiful faces. Now I see you. I'm blowing kisses to you all.
You know, one thing I forgot to add is have fun. Like, we had a lot of fun doing this work. It was hard work, so I think infusing fun in it is really important, even for those long hours.
Any other questions from the audience?
Let's have some hard ones.
Travis is gonna bring the mic.
There. My name is April. I work in Providence, Rhode Island, and my job is to connect kids to nature using city parks and outdoor learning spaces. One of the questions are, this is a complicated moment thing. One of the struggles I have is kind of what you're talking about. A lot of these careers that you're talking about, there's a huge struggle, right? So a lot of pushing, it's a lot of self-motivation to get there. And quite honestly, I don't know about everybody else, but I am not rolling in dough in my job. So I struggle sometimes talking with the kids who are inspired. They're like, I want to go and save the world. I want to save 222. I want to go do these things, but it's, they have a lot of struggles growing up, which I feel like Melody does resonate with. And I don't know, like, how honest are you when you're talking to kids about what that struggle is going to be? Because I want to be inspiring. I want those kids to want to save the world, but I also want to be very realistic with what it's going to be. So I'm interested to hear if any of you have had that experience and what you tell kids, and I say kids, any young person that's growing up that wants to kind of pursue something like this, knowing that you really have to prepare for that kind of lifestyle.
Were you able to?
I can start if you like me
Go
to.
for it. Yes.
With little bitty kids like K through 6, K through 7, I don't talk about being sexually assaulted, but I do talk about protecting themselves. The way they protect themselves in school, even. They don't want to be beat up by the school bully, for example. So I would couch it in those terms for my little ones. A high school student, I can talk about being sexually assaulted. I can talk about being beat up. I can talk about my work being taken away from me and given to someone else. I can talk about the tougher issues. Other things I can talk about to my little folks is being the best at what they're studying, knowing their science, if they're going to be a scientist or mathematician or artist or whatever it is, knowing that field and being an expert, being 3 times as good as other folks. So those are the ways that I kind of couch the discussions with my students and my Boys and Girls Club kids and my scouts and others.
Great, thank you, Melody.
Yeah, I get a lot of calls. I do a lot of work in schools and get a lot of calls. Always make time for young people if they want to have a discussion. I'm pretty honest. I don't come from, kind of lower middle class. We were always fine, but working for a nonprofit, I'll never be financially secure, right? But so I'm pretty honest about that with kids that, if you're going to take this path, this is what you're going to have to encounter. But I'm also encouraging that, financial security or having things support, you can still work for the environment. Just it may be in another career, maybe you're CFO or something like that. I'll tell you, if I could do it all over again, take the launch start. Put all this work into forming a company and then we I do think the nonprofit model is good. And also the government agency work. It's low pay, you're out there begging policies, it's not easy. So remarkably, even when I try to deter people, it's still go for it. You're passionate about it, you're and I think that's good because it's like honest about it.
So my field is a little different, obviously, journalism. But one of the good things about what we do is that we can be freelance. So I often talk to students, and if they're, concerned about whether they're get a staff job, and staff jobs can also be very mercurial. I've survived 30 layoffs each year. Yeah. Media is a very real industry. I suggest freelancing. So there's lots of opportunities for young people to build their own website and start a blog and, start a YouTube channel and sort of build their journalism career that way. So we're trying to find alternatives to get students excited about journalism that aren't necessarily the standard.
Great. Any other questions? Was there a hand up back there? Yeah, awesome.
Hello, my name is Jasmine Murphy. I'm from research at the Constellation Center, and really interested in something non touchable, which is kind of encouraging people to build relationships with non-human beings and getting past this thing that's kind of been drilled into all of our heads of like, don't anthropomorphize, which I've always had an issue with and never really understood why. My question is, how do you encourage people to build those relationships and to perceive non-human beings as neighbors, as other people, so to speak, while also drawing those lines of, you know, that doesn't mean you should feed them, that doesn't mean you should approach them. How do you find that balance? With the core of my question.
Melody, could you hear that question?
I couldn't. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no
Maureen.
worries. I'll repeat it. So in terms of connecting people with wildlife and maybe, you know, using anthropomorphization to make those personal connections, how do you do that without, while still conveying messages like don't feed wildlife or don't, you know, go up and touch wildlife?
The way I do it is trying to foster that love, that passion for urban wildlife. I find that my students, my kids are so excited to see deer in a field, for example, that they kind of lose their minds and want to run up and touch it and pet it and play with it and that sort of thing. So when they see something, I always tell them, enjoy it from a distance, don't touch. Never touch anything without an adult telling you it's okay to touch. And hopefully mom or dad have the sense to, when they're shepherding their children, let them know not to touch anything. But I don't like to say, you know, you cannot touch anything, absolutely, because I don't want to go against something that the parents may say to that child. So I always tell them that I'm saying don't touch wildlife, urban wildlife, but listen to your parents. The other thing is I try to excite them in every sense about urban wildlife. Not only are they excited to see a live animal, but finding a bone or, like I said before, some fur or some hair or anything like that, a turtle shell. It's very exciting for them. And I also use a roving naturalist who brings live animals for the kids to interact with. Snakes and turtles and owls and other kinds of birds that are not releasable to the wild anymore. The roving naturalist, his name is Matt Feldgren, comes along with me to talk to my kids and always brings the live animals. And that's one way that I get the kids to pay attention to everything we're doing during a program, is have those animals there and say that they can see these urban wildlife at the end of the presentation. So those are three of the things that I do.
Great. Thank you, Melody.
Thank you. It's such a great question, and what I spend almost most of my time these days really in trying to get people to see wildlife as neighbors. It's a great way to put it. And I definitely probably come in on the animal rights side of the science spectrum, but I think science is catching up with for those of us who've had animals in full life knows, which is that, you know, that we have more in common. I think Peter is a great example to show that it can be done. Nobody tried to pet him, nobody tried to feed him, and people looked out for him. When he was, you know, his behavior flipped those last 6 weeks, there wasn't a lot of fear, as Seth remember, but people even on social media like, hey, look out for him, you know, report the sightings, don't approach him. So I think it is a re-education I think it's gonna take some time. But, you know, we learn how to deal with other people. We learn how to, I don't know, that for some reason the analogy that occurred to me is, you know, I grew up in an Irish household, so we always had alcohol around, you know, we had wine. And so I didn't go through that binging period of college, getting that drunk, you know, because it wasn't my first exposure. And I think we have to start early to show people what it means to live with wildlife in the schools. Having worked in national parks, and you know, it's interesting in the case with the bison recently and seeing what I think people want to label as bad behavior, but I think that bison case is a really interesting issue to look at. In that, was it necessarily a bad thing to say that maybe? I don't know. We could have a whole talk about that, but playing on most people want to help wildlife. And if we can just educate them on the best ways to do that, I think that people are pretty savvy. People get it. And I think P22 is a good example of have some fun with it and don't start with the rules. I mean, I think that was, we had fun with P22 and they'd come to this page and they'd learn about behavior, but we didn't start off with like the list of rules. So I think it's an entry to get people to learn how to be around wildlife in ways it doesn't threaten them.
I can share an anecdote from my reporting. When I was in Asheville, North Carolina, there is a very strong but small contingent of people who feed black bears. And they invite the black bears onto their decks, sometimes into their houses. They expose them to their dogs, they hug them, they touch them. And, you know, I observed this with a skeptical eye, as I should as a journalist. But one thing that I realized is extremely difficult, and I don't think that was the solution is the wildlife biologists who work there try to communicate with these people as much as they can that they're not healthy. I mean, people will buy like 30-pound bags of filberts, which are hazelnuts, and just dump them in their yard, and the bears just sit there eating these hazelnuts. And I'm not sure why it's hard for them to communicate that this is not good for the animal. So I think it's something that continually needs to be worked on, because I kept hearing from these folks that were feeding the bears that they were protecting them from hunters. So by keeping them in their backyard, they were preventing them from going further into North Carolina. So it's a really challenging situation, but I very much anecdote to your question, if there definitely is aims for them. It's a problem. They're still looking at that situation.
Good point. I will also add, when I worked in the Associated Bear program, to your point, it got at taking people to realize what the consequences were for wildlife. And again, most people don't want wildlife first. I think that is a way to show and to get people to have boundaries, like we have with people.
Any questions on that?
Kind of flipping it on its head, how would you mitigate or have you had an experience about fear? Because I know fear is like a big driver of how people perceive management practices and their interactions with wildlife. For those folks, what have your experiences been, and have you had these successes for converting them to that coexistence practice?
So Melody, the question was, fear is a common theme with the public, fear of wildlife. And do you have any experience sort of learning about that fear from people and teaching them to not be fearful of wildlife? Is that good? Yeah. Okay, cool.
Sorry, I was muted. Yes, thank you very much. And thanks for that question and all these great questions. With fear, especially with children that I teach, they are often very afraid even to come to a park, because they think that there are bears and tigers and lions and everything running around in an urban setting, and that these animals are going to get them if they go to a park. So first, if there's a lot of educating to do to let them know that no, they're probably not going to be attacked by a lion or a tiger in downtown Arlington, Virginia, or in DC. So after we educate, then we bring them in contact with animals. I bring them in contact with animals that they can pet, like a snake or a turtle, or not so much a predator, but non-predatory species. And their little eyes light up when they get to do that. Maybe touching the snake, especially because so many people have an irrational fear of snakes. And it's just delightful to see their little face just light up like sunshine when they're petting a snake. And they find out that no, it's not slimy, or it's probably not going to bite me. I make sure that all of their experiences with urban wildlife are positive, so that they, if they get bitten by a snake when they're petting it under my guidance, that wouldn't help us out at all, right? So I have to make sure the animals they're encountering make a positive experience for them. So those are the two things that I do.
Great, thanks, Melody.
Yeah, such an interesting question, because we're all afraid of something, right? I had inordinate fear of ticks growing up, but two things. One, we know that facts a lot don't matter. I mean, I will use the statistics in a lot of my talks or when I'm talking to people, like mountain lions. 40 million people in California over 100 years. Attacks. I mean, it is way down on the list versus 4,000 people a year. But that doesn't resonate with everybody. I think it comes back to the things we've been talking about, which is storytelling. If you haven't seen the TED Talk by John Fallon, he wrote a great book about watching people watch wildlife, which when you work in national parks, you do a lot as well. But he talked about the evolution of how we feel about the teddy bear, about the bear, which was when Roosevelt famously spared a bear in Yellowstone National Park. Roosevelt was such an interesting person, loved conservation, but also animals away in protected places and not protected at the time. And he spared this bear. And at the time, people thought bears were vermin, right? And this press story starts racing, and all of a sudden, the whole national feeling around black bears changes, and you have the teddy bear today after that. And to your point, people now see bears as cuddly. It's the same evolution of mountain lions in California. Somebody did their PhD of how goose coverage changed. Mountain lions being these, beasts who are going to attack us, to being again more neighbors, maybe is way to put it. So I think it gets back to all the tools we've been talking about is we have to get people to feel about animals differently. And we talk a lot about children, but we also have to reach the adults as well. And I think that just gets about stories, emotionally.
One anecdote, another one that comes to mind is the Asian giant hornet, which I know has now been renamed, I think, to the northern giant hornet, because Asian giant hornet is repetitive. But in any case, we reported a lot about that subject, and I think we did a service to journalism, and I'm not trying to knock my journalism colleagues, but you probably saw a lot of the inflammatory headlines about, this small group of hornets discovered in Washington State. There's maybe 2 nests, and suddenly, there's all these inflammatory headlines about these killer animals. And what's really sad is there is a notable increase in people killing native wasps throughout the country, not just Washington State. So Nat Geo did a series of stories making it very clear that this was the nest in Washington State. As far as we know, it's been eradicated. I haven't heard that it's spread. And so I feel like my job, as much as I can as a science journalist, is to amplify those well-reported stories that do not use or attack or
you know, you've seen all those stories and cringed at them, I'm sure, so. Even though maybe they might make people quit, they make them afraid. And that's not. But it's against.
One more question, so, was there a question here before? Oh,
This is really, confused me. So I picked it up on the movie. But I was just curious about this. Oh, good question. Everybody hear it? Sure.
Hey, Melody, the question was, what did happen to P22? So that's gonna fill us in.
This, I think for me, I talked a lot about how P22 set a lot of precedent. I think we adapted, and I think we have the head of the Department of Fish and Wildlife being transparent, allowing a wildlife advocate like me in the room to help make a decision. We actually sit with the animal, but also communicate that to the public. When you have scientists and agency folks and people like myself making the announcement on Zoom in tears, it gets at all the things we've been talking about, right? That it shows compassion for animals, and I really have to, compliment the agencies there for how they handle that whole situation. Chuck Vaughn in the head, he came to the celebration of life and said how he's still deeply concerned about having to make that decision. So I think, first of all, just it was such, to me, a remarkable shift in how we handle these decisions about euthanizing wildlife and when to and how we communicate it to the public. But what ultimately happened to him? So he was captured. His staff can tell you the biologists who studied him as part of the National Park Service study. For 10 years, he lived peacefully, coexistent, wise, and his behavior flipped almost overnight. There was something obviously wrong with the cat, and that's when the National Park Service got the authorization to capture him. At first, it was looking like, hey, we treat him and release him. We just don't know what's wrong with him. But once he was captured and the testing started happening, and then it went to possibly a sanctuary because a little fact, he did injure somebody before he was captured. In between when the capture order was given, a woman did what I would have done, gotten between him and her dog, and she got scratched up pretty badly. So there was at that point no way he was back to the wild. But the sanctuary at that point is being looked at. But if you've read all the health accounts, I got called down on a Thursday saying you need to get down here. And at that point, having been through this with too many dogs and cats, and you get to the vet, the list of ailments, it was not going to be a peaceful retirement for him. He had been hit by a car, he had his organs herniated into his chest, which they could have fixed possibly, even though it would be risky to do surgery on a 12-year-old. But they had stage 2 kidney failure diagnosed and a host of other ailments. It was not to do surgery. So that's when the decision to euthanize was being made. And then, as you probably read, there was some disagreement over what to do with his remains. And I will say this challenging parts of the P22 story for me being kind of caught in the middle. There was the extreme of, mounting and stuffing him in a museum, which, I can say most of the public didn't want, as well as the indigenous leaders. But then some of the indigenous leaders didn't want any science done, no testing, no autopsy. I think we got to a good place and it was a good moment at the end. And ultimately, testing was done, and I was there in a very private ceremony. It was very undisclosed location because I was joking with somebody, it would turn into Jim Morrison's grave. He's told that he's buried. So I think even his death in all those areas I mentioned, from the agency handling it, the to, you know, not treating him as just another museum specimen. A model again or something. He's in a very peaceful location. He's getting the peace he didn't get in Griffith Park, which I think is good. One last thing I'll tell you, both in the Greek Theater and at the burial ceremony, Red Tail Hawk came over and swooped and called. And I like to think, I know this is getting out of the realm of science, that perhaps is P22 and he was trapped his entire life. But perhaps he has freedom as a Red Tail Hawk in this the next life form.
All right, I think we have time for one more question.
Hello, wow, the pressures of being the last person to ask me. My name's Haley. Thank you so much for sharing so much of yourselves in your talks. I'm so grateful to have heard your stories and also to have seen some really tremendous science communication. So thank you so much on all levels. They're really, really fabulous. Maybe another round of applause. So I have spent a lot of my life studying rats. You know, famously, everyone loves them. And something that built off a couple of other questions that came up earlier was around, you know, fear of wanting to feed wildlife, right? Our relationships with animals are so complex. And in terms of urban rats, right, I spend so much of my time telling people to stop poisoning them or it's killing them, while recognizing that the communities in which I work, in underserved communities, are really affected by rats. And I work with pest control professionals whose jobs are based off of killing rats a lot of this time. And so I wanted to come back to that science communication piece of the question and ask about how you shift your stories based off of who you're talking to, right? Audience is so central to how you tell a story. So if you could share a little bit about how you think of the story that you tell in relation to who you're talking to, I'd be really grateful for that. Thank you.
Melody, were you able to catch that?
I think so. How do we tailor our stories based on the audience we're talking to, right?
Yep.
Well, right, okay. I do it a lot by age because I talk to children so much. But when I'm talking to adults, I really have to know who my audience is. First of all, I look at the organization they're associated with if I'm coming to a conference like this. I want to know whether it's international or national. I want to know if there's a mission and any vision statements for that organization. I use all of that to tailor my remarks. I also look at the demographics of the group because I have to say most of the time when I'm speaking to groups, there aren't a lot of people of color in those groups just based on the profession that I've chosen and my expertise. So I do put my heart out there and support folks from these organizations who are trying to build diversity in their organizations. Right now, I'm with the Northern Virginia Native Plants Association, and I'm on their board to try to help them diversify their membership and their board. Well, sometimes people think just this is an aside. Just because I'm Black, I know all the Black people, all the Black scientists, and I can just trot them out to help with anything that they want help with. So those are the things that I look at before I go and speak with a group.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent question. I think it gets at sort of our approach to the P22 work was empowering other voices so they don't just hear one, right? I think one of our core parts of our work to me is just as important as wildlife crossing is. We do a lot of work in Watts and connecting people to wildlife there. And for me, it's a lot about listening what those connections are instead of me telling what they are and build from it. So I think a lot of it is just more, when you don't call the answers. That's something I haven't really taught viewers. Tell people how to think of the environment. But on a more practical stuff, yeah. I just did a talk at this private club, great, and it's definitely Republican based private club, great people, but my talk on wildlife crossing shifted to ROI and how these come in jobs and how they fuel the economy. That's where it's really anti stuff. So I think it is for me always trying to understand what motivates people. Having said that, there are just some things I'm not going to shift. I think you have to have sort of that moral base, and I'm not sure I'd shift too much when companies.
You probably touched on one of the most challenging aspects of being a journalist, and that is figuring out who to talk to and how to control your biases. So, I would like to write a story about guns. We should talk. But how do you represent? It's a heavy responsibility. How do you represent science in a way that is responsible and that is serving the reader? And this actually came up going back to the Asheville Bear experience. We spent hours arguing. The photographers, the photo editors, the management of National Geographic, whether we should depict these bear feeders in the story. And it became kind of an ethical thing. They're breaking the law technically, but it's part of the story. They believe they're protecting the bears, even though they're not. Should we? So we went back and forth. There really wasn't a right answer, but we felt like at the end of the day, in telling the story, we couldn't completely avoid showing what these people are doing. Is that the right thing? I don't know. But we communicated in the story that it wasn't legal. We communicated that it's not good. But we also showed that it's a constant situational struggle in developing stories is who you talk to and who you voice to.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for your great questions and to our panelists for their amazing answers. And let's give one round of applause. Awesome. So this concludes our plenary session this morning. We'll be back at Hamilton. As Travis said, we are not coming back to Eaton. Please nobody come back. So everything else will be at Hamilton. We'll have afternoon sessions starting at 1:20. So feel free to enjoy a long lunch, reconnecting with folks. And if you didn't get your name badge yet, we'll see you at 12:30 over there. Thank you. Thank you so much, Melody. That was awesome.
Thank you, Melody. That was wonderful.
Glad it worked out with the Zoom. Everyone can hear you great. So
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I thank the other panelists too. They work great.
awesome.
It was
Well,
so
we'll be in
good to
touch.
hear them.
Thank you. Right.
I wish I was there to have lunch with you, so I owe you lunch. I guess I'm gonna have to come up to Canada to buy
Right.
you lunch.
Yeah, please send me an email. Yeah, thank you. Okay,
Do
bye.
it. Bye. Thank you.